All right, so we've done the 1965 NHL Amateur Draft, the third annual draft for the NHL. And now, before getting into the next season, that would be the 1965-66 NHL season. We're going to talk about not one, not two, but three different trades that Punch Imlach made before the beginning of the next season. So this was a rather busy spring and summer in comparison to the other preseasons we've looked at. This previous year, they got kicked out of the playoffs in the first round by the Montreal Canadiens. So, understandably, Punch is looking to, you know, get back to the finals, win another cup. So, we're going to take a look at each of these trades. So, we're in the spring of 1965 at this point. And this is first trade that Punch made was just 19 days after the Montreal Canadiens won the 1965 Stanley Cup. He worked out a deal with Sid Abel, the GM of the Detroit Red Wings. And this was a big trade, a big trade. There's also another big trade. Not, it wasn't quite as big as this because there was 8 players involved with this trade. So yeah, we're going to get into it. So the Maple Leafs acquired defenseman Marcel Pronovost, left winger Larry Jeffrey, defenseman Ott Erickson, center Eddie Joyal, and left winger Lowell McDonald. And going to Detroit was right winger Andy Bathke, center Billy Harris, and left winger Gary Jarrett. So leaving Toronto, you got a couple of everyday players leaving Toronto. So this should be fun to take a deeper look into this and what these guys did before and after the trade. So we're going to go to Detroit first and look at the players they got. We certainly know a couple of them already playing in Toronto. So why not start with the Hall of Famer? He won a cup a couple of years ago in Toronto, and that is Andy Bathke. By the point of the trade, he had played 789 NHL games. He scored 291 goals with 501 assists for 792 points. Pretty good job there by Andy. He'd actually be 33 years old by the time the next season starts up. So, he's a wily veteran, been around for a while in the league. And he would still play another 280 games, scoring 38 goals with 123 assists for 161 points. And he was actually left unprotected in the 1967 expansion draft. And it was the Pittsburgh Penguins who plucked him from the Red Wings at that point. We're going to go through it at some point, that expansion draft. And dear, oh dear, there's a lot of good players that leave some teams to help these upstart six. There were going to be 6 of them, upstart teams to give them some actual NHL caliber players on their teams. And there's an example of one right there. So as well, we got Billy Harris. He would be 30 years old when the next season started. So he, yet again, another wily veteran. He had played 610 games for the Leafs over the course of his 10-year career so far. He had scored 106 goals with 181 assists for 287 points. His career high, he did score 22 goals back in 1958-59 for the Leafs. He played in 4 All-Star games from 1958 and 1962 through 64 and won the Stanley Cup 3 times in Toronto. So that was 62 through 64. Um, and definitely haven't got the list started yet. The truth is, I'm waiting for it's coming in the mail. I'm going to get a nice big what easel with paper and everything on it, and I'll write it all out. Um, so everything that'd be great. But when that comes, I'll definitely start my Leafs list. And I'm going to put Billy Harris on this list. He certainly did enough, in my opinion, to be on that list. He won 3 Stanley Cups. It was a big part of each of those cups, big time. He's going to be on that list. Um, Now, after the trade, Billy would go on to play another 160 games, scoring 20 goals, adding 38 assists for 58 points. Another guy selected in the expansion draft, it was by the Oakland Seals. Um, and after spending parts of 2 seasons there, he then played for the Pittsburgh Penguins after that as well. Now, after his playing days, Billy got into coaching. And really, just to mention the big stops along the way, he coached in a few different places, but he coached for the Oshawa Nationals in the opening season of the WHA in 1972. He was 73, and then he coached the Toronto Toros the following season. He then was an assistant coach for the Edmonton Oilers for 2 seasons from 1980 through 82, right in the NHL, after they had left the WHA. Now, the final player coming over to Detroit was Gary Jarrett. He was the youngster of the group. I think he was around 24, 25 at the time. He played only 1 game for the Leafs way back in 1960-61, but he would go on to play 297 more games in the NHL. He was getting playing time. He'd score 104 goals with 119 assists for 223 points. Gary would score a career high 22 goals for the Oakland Seals back in 1968-69. Um, and then, but when the WHA started up, Gary jumped over to that league and did quite well. Did quite well. He played for the Cleveland Crusaders for 4 seasons and scored 40 goals in his opening season there. So he was a 40 goal man in the WHA. And Jerry Cheevers was one of the goalies playing in Cleveland at the time for those 4 seasons. Um, he started his career with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Jerry Cheevers. Now, we're going to go over the players coming to Toronto now. So, coming over the Leafs, we're going to talk about the big guy in this trade, and that is Marcel Pronovost. Um, uh, Looking at the team, I've got the list down here, looking at it again. They already got a strong decor, and you're going to add this guy in it. At the time of the trade or coming into the next season, he's going to be 35 years old. We already got Timmy Horton and Alan Stanley. They're already getting up there in age. So you're going to add another guy into it. So Imlach obviously liked the veteran guys. And Marcel, he had quite a track record coming over to Toronto, and I'm going to go over that right now. Um, so let's see. He actually had already played almost 1,000 games. He'd already played 983 games, all for Detroit, during his 15-year career. At this point, he wasn't a big point guy, but he did have 80 goals and 217 assists for 297 points during that time. But he was an all-star on 9 different occasions. So 1950, 54, 55, 57 through 61, and 1963. He had already won the Cup 4 times in Detroit: 1950, 52, 54, and 59. And in addition to that, he had already played 118 playoff games for the Wings in the playoffs. Great work. He had scored 7 goals and 23 assists for 30 points during those playoffs he had played. Now, after the tank, Marcel did still have some time left in the tank. He would go on to play another 223 games, score 8 goals with 40 assists for 48 points. He'd also be an all-star twice, so 1965, right at the beginning of the season, and 1968 after they won the Stanley Cup in 1967. There you go. And that is the big thing dealing with this trade. The Leafs are gonna win the cup in 1967 here. It's coming. So that's a big thing to do with this trade. Marcel got into coaching first off after his playing days as well, and naming the big stops for him along the way. He was a head coach of the Chicago Cougars in the WHA, their opening season, 1972-73, and was the head coach of the Buffalo Sabres in the NHL for parts of two seasons, so 1977 through 79. Then was an assistant coach for the Detroit Red Wings for the parts of two seasons, 1980 through 82. And then in 1990, Marcel joined the New Jersey Devils as a scout. And he stayed there until he passed away. Supposedly, he convinced them to draft a goalie named Martin Brodeur. Excellent choice there. And then, Brodeur was a big reason why they went on to win three Stanley Cups there. So um, Pronovost got three more Stanley Cups, giving him a grand total of eight over his career. Good job there by Marcel. So glad to hear there's a little bit of left in his tank, a little bit of time left in his tank there as well. So next up is in the trade coming to Toronto is Larry Jeffrey, who is a youngster. He would be 10 years younger than Marcel. He'd be 25 getting into this next season. From Goderich, Ontario. He had played four seasons with the Wings. He played 170 games. He wasn't a big goal guy, but he did have 24 goals with 34 assists and 58 points to go along with 217 penalty minutes. So I wasn't afraid of the penalty box there, Larry. So he might have had a little bit of an edge to his game there as well. After the trade, Larry would go on to play another 196 games, scoring 15 goals with 28 assists for 43 points. He was also there with the Leafs to win that 1967 Stanley Cup. And Larry went on. He also played for the New York Rangers as well. And then Larry, this seems to be reoccurring with a lot of these guys. He got into coaching as well after his playing days and was a head coach of the Tidewater Wings in the AHL for the 1971-72 season. Next up is a defenseman coming to Toronto, and that is Ott Eriksson. He had played 160 games in the NHL so far. He had 3 goals, 13 assists for 16 points. Um, Now, a problem for Eriksson, I look at this deep core and I'm like, ugh, you're probably not going to make it. You're going to be in the minors for Toronto. Unfortunately, in case there's an injury or something, maybe we can call you up, but there's guys on this list already ahead of him as well. So it's going to be tricky for him to break this lineup. But he would play for the Leafs during that 1967 run to win in the Stanley Cup. So he was there for that cup win as well. And that was it. He didn't play any regular season games for the Leafs during his tenure or being within the Toronto organization. After that cup, though, Ott would go on to play with the Oakland Seals, who claimed him in that expansion draft in 1967. And he would go on to play another 66 games with them, score 4 goals with 11 assists for 15 points. Next on the list is Eddie Joel. He came along in the trade. He was also known as the Jet. That's a great nickname. Bobby Hull had that one too. He played 3 seasons in Detroit, and he had played 107 games there, scoring 20 goals with 29 assists for 49 points. He would play 14 games for the Leafs in the next upcoming season, but here's that darn expansion draft again. He was claimed by the LA Kings in that expansion draft. It was once he got to LA, he was able to show off the skill that he had, getting a lot more playing time than he would be getting in Toronto, for example. He actually went on there to score 33 goals for them one season in 1968-69. Good job there by Eddie. After the trade, Eddie would go and play another 358 NHL games, scoring 108 goals with 105 assists for 213 points. He would also play for the Philadelphia Flyers as well after playing for LA. Eddie then jumped up over to the WHA when they started in 1972-73, and he played for the Alberta Oilers, who then became the Edmonton Oilers, and played for a total of 4 seasons for that club. He scored 22 goals for that club on 2 different occasions in 72-73 and 1974-75. He played a total of 239 games in the WHA, scoring 57 goals and adding 55 assists for 112 points. And the final player coming over to Toronto is Lowell McDonald. He played the parts of 4 seasons in Detroit. Um, wasn't played a whole lot, but he did play 46 games during his time there. Scored 5 goals with 6 assists for 11 points. Unfortunately, he never did play a game for the Leafs. Um, this is a tough team to crack. Yeah, every team in the league was a tough team to crack. There was only 6 of them. And here's that expansion draft again. He was claimed by the LA Kings in that draft. And this is where he was getting playing time and started to show his skill in the NHL. His best years, though, were when he played with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Uh, and he was in his 30s by that point. He wasn't a young player anymore. Went on and scored 43 goals and had 82 points for them in 1973-74. Good job there. So Lowell will go on to play another 460 games in the NHL, scoring 175 goals, having 204 assists for 379 points. He did play in 2 All-Star games as well, 1973 and 74, and he won the Bill Masterton Trophy in 1972-73, coming back and really the beginning of the best part of his career right there. Um, Now, his grandson is Ben McDonald, who was selected in the 2022 draft by the Seattle Kraken and is a centerman. So perhaps we may see him in the NHL someday. I think he was selected in the 3rd round, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So you might see his grandson in the NHL someday. Now, with this one, I'm not going to break down the numbers, combined with these guys and that guys and what could have happened there and all this. The Leafs won the 1967 Stanley Cup, and 3 of those guys were there. That's enough for me. You won a cup. That's as a fan, that's the end game. That's what you want to do. That's what they did. So I'm going to give this one the green light, and I'm not going to X this one out. Just keep her going. That was a good trade, Punch. So the next trade, the second one, was done on June the 8th, 1965. This time, Punch worked out a deal with the Boston Bruins. Going to Boston was going to be right winger Ron Stewart. As well, coming to Toronto and for Ron Stewart, there was going to be 3 players. Those players were right wingers Andy Hebbington and Orland Kurtenbach, as well as defenseman Pat Stapleton. Wait a minute. 2 of those guys I've heard of. This could be a really good trade for Toronto. So let's take a look and see how this trade worked and what these players did after this trade. This is going to be fun stuff here. So we'll start from the Bruins side first. We're going to look at Ron Stewart. Now, Ron Stewart, like Billy Harris, he's going to go on my Leafs Legends list. He played in Toronto for quite a while and did has some excellent things there in Toronto. He had already played 838 games for the Leafs over a 14-year career, or sorry, 13-year career, all of it in Toronto. He had scored 186 goals with 182 assists for 368 points. He did score 20 goals, 21 back in 1958-59 for the Leafs. He was a four-time All-Star, so 1955 and then 62 through 64, and won the Cup three times with the Leafs. So that was 62 through 64, and then therefore was in the All-Star game. He also must have been a good penalty killer. And he led the league in shorties twice during his career, 1953 and 54, and 55 through 56. He did score a lot of shorthand goals for Toronto, much like Bobby Pulford, another good penalty killer in Toronto. Ron actually, I think, had a lot more left in him than maybe Punch thought. Punch maybe is thinking, geez, he's getting close to 900 games here. Maybe he doesn't have a lot left time left in the tank. I'm not sure, but Ron would go on to play another 515 games, meaning he played over 1,300 games in the NHL. He scored another 90 goals, adding 71 assists for 161 points. He, in fact, would score 20 goals this upcoming season for the Bruins after this trade. He would go on to also to play for the St. Louis Blues, the New York Rangers on a couple of different occasions, the Vancouver Canucks, and the New York Islanders. So he kind of bounced around a bit after he left Toronto, where he was for 13 seasons, but he still had some time left in him. He would actually go on to play until he was 40 years of age. Good job there by Ron. And then Ron went on to coach the LA Kings in 1977-78. So we're going to look at the guys coming over to Toronto now. First was right winger Andy Hebington. He was also known as Spuds. Good nickname there. He played 9 seasons in the NHL by this point. He had played 630 games, scored 189 goals, adding 202 assists for 391 points. In 1958-59, he scored a career high 33 goals for the New York Rangers. That season, he also led the NHL in power play goals with 15. So this guy was a goal scorer. He knew how to put the puck in the net. He also won the Lady Byng back in 1956-57, and he was an All-Star in 1960. So we got ourselves a good player. In saying all that, unfortunately, Andy never played another game in the NHL. One thing, a really interesting note with him, he went on to play 23 consecutive professional hockey seasons um, before getting to the NHL and afterwards, but all in total, 23 seasons in a row. So he had a lot left in the tank, but maybe not in the NHL, fortunately. Also coming over was Orland Kurtenbach, also known as Big Kurt. He stood 6'2", which was a big guy back then in the NHL. He had played 153 games, scoring 18 goals, adding 51 assists for 69 points, and he wasn't afraid of the penalty box. I have seen him play. I remember him getting in a fight or two. He had 190 PIMs at that point too. Other than the Bruins, he did play for the New York Rangers as well. I think he started his career with them. Now, after this trade, Orland would play another 487 games, scoring 101 goals, adding 162 assists for 263 points. He ended up scoring 20 goals twice after the trade and got a career high 24 in 1971-72. Wasn't with the Leafs, though. It was with the Vancouver Canucks, which I think is where he played his best hockey, was with the Canucks. Other than the Leafs and Canucks, he went back and played for the Rangers for a second stint as well. After his playing career, he coached the Canucks, in fact, for a couple of seasons, 1976 through 78. Um, and from the Leafs, though, he was claimed by the Rangers in that intra-league draft the following season. After this next season, he was left unprotected, and the Rangers claimed him. So the last player coming over in this trade was defenseman Pat Stapleton. Some interesting things to note about this guy, but he was also known as Whitey. He had played 90 games for the Bruins, scoring 2 goals and 8 assists for 10 points. But after the trade, Pat went on to play another 545 games in the NHL, scoring 41 goals, adding 286 assists for 327 points. He would also play in 4 All-Star games. That was 1967, 69, 70, and 72. He also played for Team Canada against the Russians in the 1972 Summit Series as a defenseman. Now, in 1973-74, Pat jumped over to the WHA and he played for the Chicago Cougars. He also was their coach at the same time, so he was a player coach. Interesting to note there. You heard that correctly. He did both. He did this for 2 seasons in Chicago and then played for the Indianapolis Racers for 2 seasons and then 1 season for the Cincinnati Stingers, all playing under future NHL coach and Stanley Cup winner Jacques Demers. That's an interesting note. And then after he retired from from his playing days, he then coached the Indianapolis Racers for 25 games in the 1968 or 78-79 season. And unfortunately, the day after the Leafs picked him up from the Chicago, or after the day after the Leafs picked him up in this trade from the Boston Bruins, he was left unprotected. So what happened? The Chicago Blackhawks claimed him in that intra-league draft. Whoops. Huh. So when you're originally thinking this could be a dandy of a trade, we might have ripped the Boston Bruins off here, a 3-for-1 trade. No, every single one of these players, including Stewart himself, they either got picked up in the intra-league draft, the expansion draft, or they never played again in the NHL. So you could either get Stewart for 2 seasons or Curtin back for one. And that's what it comes down to. And I feel that is not a huge deal to really go one way or another. Perhaps if Stewart got a third season out of this, and maybe if you're looking at, hey, I could have Stewart for 3 seasons, maybe I would go against this trade. But since this is what you got, I'm just going to say, whatever, go with it. I'll give it the green light and we'll take Orland and give away Ron in this trade. So finally, in September, this is a big trade, in my opinion, for sure. The Leafs worked out a deal with the AHL farm team out of Springfield. Um, you could do that back then. NHL teams could trade, not just with NHL teams. So in the deal, the Leafs received goaltender Bruce Gamble, while Larry Johnston and Bill Smith went the other way to the AHL club. So we'll look at who comes to Toronto first here. Now, Gamble had played 1 season with the New York Rangers and 2 with the Boston Bruins. Sorry, for a total of 83 games, uh, 18 wins and 1 shutout, with a goals against average of 3.92 and a save percentage of 889. Huh, not so great. Maybe he belongs in the minors then, and maybe this deal makes sense. Toronto will send him to the minors. Um, but further into Gamble, and I looked this up, after this playing time, he was then demoted to Springfield for not playing so well, I guess. But after 1 year playing there, he did not report back and he missed the entire 1964-65 season. So the previous season, he missed. The season before that, he did play 21 games, just to throw that out there. Um, when I read up on this about Gamble, it was actually the owner, coach, and Hall of Fame defenseman Eddie Shore, um, who he did not get along with. There was a big time friction between the two of them. Um, So I guess we can thank Punch Imlach for saving his career and making this trade, I guess, and bringing him to Toronto. At the time of the trade, supposedly he was working in the grain elevators way up in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So after this trade, Gamble come to Toronto. He would actually go on to play 245 more games in the NHL. He'd win 93, tying 55, had a much better goals against average of 297. He was also playing on a better team. Um, and also, this is a big one, a way better save percentage. It was a nice 913 in the games he would play from here on in. He actually led the NHL in save percentage in 1967-68 when he was playing with the Leafs, when he had a really nice 934 save percentage. After he played in Toronto, he also did play for the Philadelphia Flyers. So going the other way, first we'll go with Larry Johnston. He hadn't started his NHL career as of yet, but he would go on to play 320 games in the NHL, scoring 9 goals, adding 64 assists for 73 points, while grabbing up 580 pins. So this guy was a tough guy on defense. He also did play in the WHA for 49 games in the 1974-75 season, getting 9 assists in 93 penalty minutes. In the NHL, he played for the LA Kings, Detroit Red Wings, Kansas City Scouts, and the Colorado Rockies. Now, Bill Smith, the other guy that went to Springfield, he never did play a game in the NHL. So looking at that, the Leafs are actually going to get a future number one goalie that will be used like that in Toronto. Um, he was also part of that 1967 Stanley Cup run. I know at that point, Sawchuk and Bauer were getting primary time in there, but Gamble was used as a third goalie. I think he still was in the 20s in games played during the regular season. So that's really good. And we'll get to this in the future, but he was also involved in a gigantic trade for the Leafs that would have set them on a wonderful path. He was involved with that trade. So, knowing all these things, hey, I'm going to green light this trade as well. So, all three trades are going to go through for me. Why not? Absolutely. So looking at this team, there's going to be some changes coming to this team going forward for the next season. And that'll be a lot of fun to bring that season for you. And that should be the next video. We're going to do the 1965-66 NHL season, go through all the teams and how the Leafs ended up doing during the regular season. So that's it. So if you like this video, hey, hit like, don't be afraid. Hit subscribe. I'm gonna plan on definitely putting some more videos on here about the my beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. And as well, if you want to comment on anything you may know that I didn't cover about any of this, don't hesitate. You can make a comment. It'd be good to know something that I may not know. But yeah, until next time, go Leafs, go.